Okay, so you've probably heard of the Tableau MCP. I'm on record for saying I think this is one of the most important technologies in a while coming out of this sort of AI gold rush at the moment, because largely it enables us to use a bunch of APIs that, people wouldn't have been able to use before. And the reason that is because it essentially sits on top of a bunch of Tableau APIs and it allows you to use a large language model to access the information that those APIs could use. Essentially, you can sit there in a prompt window, ask a question, and then let the AI handle that request with the API and give you a response back. It's quite conversational. I'm sure you've seen tons of demos. Now, the thing that hasn't always sat well with me is with all this excitement, I've seen a lot of people using their own Tableau Cloud instances for these demos, but they've been doing it inside of ChatGPT or Claude. And in my opinion, I think it's still sensible to be cautious about using these large companies to essentially scrape your data. They do have service agreements to say, hey, we won't necessarily scrape everything, but as long as you're interacting in that chat window, all the responses you get with that LLM, there's no guarantee that what they say is actually what's happening. And in essence, you might be giving away IP or context or information about your infrastructure or your company that you didn't intend to give away. Now, it is quite easy to use a Tableau MCP. All you really need is a PAT token. A PAT token is something that's quite easy to request from your IT team, but they might not know that you're going to use it on the Tableau MCP. Just don't tell them. But anyway, what I want to show you in this video is an approach where you can run an MCP locally on your laptop without using these two companies, or Claude or ChatGPT, the ones that have been mostly talked about. MCPs are agnostic. They're not specific to any one AI model. The tool I want to show you is something called LM Studio. But just before we get into that, it is worth sort of highlighting that there are a couple of ways of running local models on your laptop. The most common one is something called Ollama. Now, Ollama is very sort of, I'd say it's on the verge of being a developer tool / sort of enthusiast tool. It runs in the command line. Kind of need to know what you're doing in the command line. The interface isn't the best, but it's really designed for you to set up something locally on your server and then be able to call it locally using your laptop or computer. So typically in an enterprise setting, a company might set up an Ollama instance in a central server and then have lots of people querying into it to be able to do stuff locally. That's sort of one approach. You can also just run it on your laptop and do exactly the same thing. That's what you can do here on this website by just downloading it. A tool that I think is better for everyone to get involved with is something called LM Studio. Now, LM Studio is a software, and the thing I really like about it is it brings the familiar interface that we know from these chatbots, ChatGPT and Claude, into an application that I think also guides you through the experience of using an LLM locally. And so if you go to the LM Studio website, you can download it, set it up. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to be running the M series version of this. You can get this for Windows as well. This is just showing me the options available for me right now. But once you've gone ahead and downloaded it, this is what it looks like. It's very, very simple. Now, I've had this application now for well over a year. I've used it in sort of very early stages to see what the local models were like, and it's a very, I think, nice tool to use. And so what I'll do is I'll just give you a quick sort of tour of how it works. On the left hand side, you've got sort of three panes, very similar to the Tableau Cloud pane on the left hand side, where you can go to different sections. So you've got the chat window, the developer window, where you can actually see the logs that are happening. You can see that I was doing some testing last night. Some models, or the folders that I have locally, the models that I have downloaded in the past. We'll get back to this soon. And then we have a search window which allows you to browse these models. So it gives you these sort of four things in a very easy to use format locally on your machine. And so what I really like is actually this window, because you're able to search models based on a bunch of criteria. I'm on a Mac, so when I'm looking for models, what I actually want to make sure is I run an MLX model. An MLX model is specifically optimized for Apple Silicon. It runs faster, and I have an M3 laptop, so it has a couple of capabilities on there that I think really take advantage of MLX, and I do notice faster performance. So you can filter by these model types, and you can sort of pretty much browse what all the models that people talk about. You'll see some very familiar names like Qwen, DeepSeek, R3. There's also some things I've just never heard of. OpenAI recently released a small model as well that you can have a look at. But there's really a whole range of things to look at. So what I would say is this is very enthusiastic thing. You need to know a little bit about the models to understand what the best sort of use is. So my sort of layman's guide to this is, listen, just come up here to the drop down, just look at most downloads or most likes. That gives you an indication of what most people are using. And so if I look at most downloads, you get like a nice list. Another thing is they do have staff picks. So if I refresh this, this will tell you sort of the things that are most sort of highly ranked as well. So this is a really sort of nice way to browse these models. Now, in terms of what model I'm going to use for this demo, the Tableau MCP, there's a couple of sort of parameters to be aware of. Number one, you have to think about the context window. Number two, you have to think about how much RAM you have in your machine. I'm very fortunate to have a large amount of RAM, 128 gig of RAM. So I'm not really limited by this list, but you might come onto this and see that actually your model can't load all entirely on RAM. You can see this here in the download options. It tells you over here on the bottom right hand side if a full GPU offload is possible. If it's not, what will start happening is you'll start using your CPU and your performance will downgrade massively. So if I look at this OpenAI model from 60 days ago, it's GPT OSS 20B. You'll see that it's 12 gig in size. When I download it, it's MLX compatible. And there's a full GPU offload possible, which means it's going to be able to bring everything locally onto the GPU, which is great in my instance because then you get a lot better performance. You can go to another model like Gemma. I think this is Google's model. This is Google's local model 100 days ago. You can see this has been converted to MLX. Again, it's 8 gig, full GPU offload possible. It has other formats as well, not just LMX. But if you scroll down, you get a little bit more information. And to be honest, this is just sort of scratching the surface in terms of context. But there's sort of a shopping list. Choose a couple of models. Start with something very small, just so you can get familiar with the software. And then once you've done that, download them. And when you go ahead and hit download, I'll hit download, for example, on this Google one here. You'll see that it starts downloading. And if I close this window, it's now going to be downloading here on the bottom right. And you can see all the downloads and all the different sort of versions that are being downloaded. Now that I've done that, I could go back here to the chat window. And I'm now ready to configure the Tableau MCP. Now, in order to do this is exactly the same setup as all the other demos you've seen, all the other examples. So all you need to do is essentially come to the Tableau MCP instructions, go to the getting started, configure your MCP in this exact way. This is an agnostic way of setting up MCPs across any application. So you just take the exact same thing if you've ever done it for Claude or ChatGPT, and then you bring it into LM Studio. And LM Studio has a pretty nice interface. It's actually a very easy interface. If I just go ahead and create a new chat, you'll see that it creates me a nice little chat window. It opens up a bunch of model parameters on the right-hand side. And I'll come to that in 1 second. We'll just park it for 1 minute. But if I go here to the bottom, you'll see there's a little plugin icon here. If we click that, you'll see that I have this option disabled for Tableau MCP, MCP/Tableau. And if I wanted to add it here because it's not already there, go ahead, select install, edit the JSON, and you'll see the JSON that you've seen pretty much for every other setup. So go ahead and configure this how you need to. There are lots of great videos already showing you how to do this, so I won't repeat that here. But once you've set that up, you're pretty much ready to go. Refresh the chat window, refresh the application. Sometimes you need to restart the application, but LM Studio is pretty good at being reactive. And then you'll be able to start using the model. Now, in order to use this inside of LM Studio, one thing you'll need to do is load the model. So I'll go up here to the very top and you'll see that I have a drop down of all the models that I downloaded locally before. You can see that that was exactly the same list. And the one I've just downloaded, just finished, Google Gemma 3 12B, it's 4 bits and it's 7 gig of RAM is needed. And this could probably work on most laptops. If you've got a 16 gig laptop, I think this can work pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and use this one. It's MLX compatible, so we should get some nice performance. It's 12 billion parameters. The number of parameters tends to give you an indication of how good it is. Later on, I'll show you how you can switch in the middle of a chat to another model to see if it has a better response. So let's start with Google. Now, before we do this, we have to make sure we change the context window. The context window for this needs to be suitably large enough. And so the way to change this is just to hold Option on a Mac. You get these sort of model parameters appearing here on the right-hand side. So let's go ahead and click on that. And you can see here the context length is currently at 131,000 tokens. We need to increase this. And As you increase this, you are increasing the RAM usage as well. And the reason we need to do this is to make sure that the responses between the MCP and the chat window and everything sort of don't run out of space. And so this is a good way to do that. Just go ahead. I'll just bump this up. I don't know why I've chosen this number. I just want to make sure I avoid any sort of errors as a result of this. You can remember these settings, so it always loads that way. If you select advanced options, you get a few more, but generally I just leave these as they are. And then if you go ahead and hit load the model, you can see that you get this progress bar here at the top. And once that has loaded, it's essentially loading it all into RAM. I can see that my RAM usage is going up here on the bottom right hand side. You can see that the system memory is going up. And once that is done, we're pretty much ready to go. The model's loaded and we can start working with it. Now, if you want to change some parameters about how the model works, over here on the right hand side, you've got a little context window which allows you to do like a system prompt, very similar to how you would in Claude or ChatGPT. You've got some model parameters in terms of how it behaves, the temperature settings. Again, I'm not going to go into this in this video. Research these before you start tweaking them, but the defaults are generally quite good. They've been pre-configured by the LM Studio community. So again, just leave these as they are. And then if I go to the program section here, you'll see that because I've already got the MCP enabled for Tableau, you can see that it's got all of these tick boxes enabled. And in order to activate them, you can go here to the right hand side and switch them on. So you can do that. And then you'll see that the Tableau icon appears here in the chat window on the bottom. Or if I didn't do that there, what I can do is I can go here into the chat window, select this up, and then go ahead and switch this to the right hand side. That will then do the exact same thing as before. And if you click on this little tool icon, it just opens this plugin section and highlights it to tell you, hey, here's where to change what I can do with this MCP. If I don't allow all, for example, you can see that I've got these three where I've explicitly allowed them out of the gate. This is a good way of restricting what the MCP can do if you want to do that. But for the purpose of this demo, I'll just allow them all, and you can see that happens, and basically they all get ticked. You can also disable specific ones, so allowing them all and or disabling them. This tick box is really just telling the MCP not to bother thinking about this particular context, and the allow all is more of a permissioning thing, and you'll see that sort of come up. So let me do this. Let me just say ask before running, so you can see that interface right before we go. Okay, so we're going to ask a question with this model. We're using Gemma 312B, and we're using the Tableau MCP. Let's ask our first question. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to ask is, tell me about my Tableau data sources. So we go ahead and hit enter, and you'll see that it loads it up. Now, one of the things it has to do, it has to process the prompt. So processing the prompt is really just taking the text, putting it into memory. And I'm doing this for the first time. So the model is going to be, it's going to be thinking about this. And the one thing to check here is that you can see the context window here is 41% full already, and I haven't really done much, okay? And so this is why you really have to play with models to really understand where the boundaries are. You can't just, sort of go full charge as you would with ChatGPT and Claude, because they do a lot of this behind the scenes for you, and they're offering a product, so they broaden all these parameters out, which is why they're quite expensive in their paid capabilities. But when you're doing this locally, you are limited by your hardware. And another weird thing about this is that each run is not deterministic. So even if I had the exact same hardware, the exact same query, the exact same configuration of everything, each time I run it, I don't necessarily get the exact same results, purely because of the circumstances around the prompt and how it's sent to the GPU, and then how it breaks that task down. So it is very much a trial and error capability. But once you have a sweet spot between a model you want, the right context window, and obviously working within the constraints of your laptop, you can more or less remember that configuration, and you can use that reliably going forward, and you're doing everything locally on your machine. So here we go. The model's loaded the prompt, and you can see this permission window is loaded up. Remember, I denied all the permissions before. I told it to ask every single time. So it's asking me, hey, would you like me to proceed with this? I'll say always allow this specific thing, and I'll go ahead and allow all the tools. And as soon as I hit proceed, you'll see that all of them on the right hand side here clear up. And now it goes ahead and starts processing the argument and the result, and you can see that it gets that back. And so now I'm having that chat GPT-like experience here locally on my machine. Nothing's going up to the servers, nothing's going up to Claude if you're using that instead. And I'm getting a bit of context, actually. It's actually giving me a little bit of, useful information. And so we can start to do things like we can ask some interesting information about this data source. This is my YouTube sort of demo data set. So I'll say, can you tell me more about this data set? Okay. And one thing that I've found is that each time you hit enter, it does take a bit of time to generate the prompt. And I don't understand enough about this to understand why this particular step takes a lot of time. But I think it's just a way to do with the models and how they're constructing the queries and then how they're loading that into memory before they then go and do some tasks, if that makes sense. So it does unfortunately take a bit of time, but again, you'll see that it is working. And this is a trade-off. This is the cost you pay for doing something locally on your machine versus a massive server farm with tons more compute and tons more resources, and also, you know, typically not free. And so, yeah, this is a pretty good ability. And I think the trade-off is worth it. For a lot of people, I still think this is faster than trying to go onto your Tableau cloud and getting all of this information, especially if you have a set of prompts that you've built up front. And another thing is that LM Studio also allows you to run as a server. So although we're using here the chat window, you can also simultaneously run it as a server. So if I actually go to this sort of command line instance, you can see that everything is happening behind the scenes. So these are the logs that are being generated, and you're able to set up LM Studio to act as a server so other applications can run using the same model you've got. So it works a bit like Olama on one hand, but it also gives you the nice chat interface at the same time. So you can use the same model in both instances. So you can test something, say you like it, and then go ahead and deploy it in an application running on the same machine. So it's quite handy. And all of this is happening behind the scenes, by the way. So as we switch these tabs, it's not sort of forgetting anything. We can go ahead and just wait for that. So let's just give this a bit of time. Then what I'll do is I'll switch to another model, which is a little bit more capable, and then you'll see what that's like. So this is Google Gemma 312B. We'll go ahead and switch to the OpenAI 20B model, which is a little bit larger and should be a little bit more capable. So let's just give this a moment to finish. Okay, here we go. So let's have a look. And it's interesting because once it's processed the prompt, everything seems to happen quite quickly. So it does the calling, it gets information. So if you actually want to expand this, you can see that it's gone and got the data source ID, it's got a response, and now it's processing the prompt. So this one's different to before because it got the response and it was immediately able to process the result because it didn't need to do anything more than essentially read this result. But what it's doing here, I believe this is not a thinking model. So what it has to do is process the prompt, process information. And now I'm getting really useful metadata. If you've never sort of logged into my site and worked on this data, hey, you're getting information about a data source you knew nothing about, and it's giving you really useful context, I think, on a data source. And you can even query the data source as an example. So this is really nice. So this is the core capability, and again, this is running locally on a machine, and I think the trade-off is worth it. The thing to bear in mind though is that this stuff is moving really quickly. Like a year ago, this stuff was much slower. The models were okay, but they weren't great. They weren't generating really nice fluid responses. Even this Google model is about 100 days old. If I switch over to the OpenAI variant, the MLX version, the 20B, let's just go ahead and hit option again. Make sure the model parameters are suitably set to quite high. We've got a nice big context window. Let's go ahead and load this model. And I'm doing this mid-chat, by the way. So a nice thing about LM Studio is you can change the model mid-chat. Now that that's loaded, you can see I can use the current model, which is the one loaded, or I can use the Gemma 312B as I had it configured previously. So now in here, I can say, okay, look, can you list all the Tableau Pulse, metrics? I won't sort of ask metric definitions to be specific. I'll just say, hey, listen, can you list all the the metrics. And now you see this model is much faster, it's more capable, but it comes with a cost. This model is quite large. I believe it's like 12 gig of RAM. So on a 16 gig RAM, it might start to challenge your laptop, because obviously your computer needs some RAM to function. But it's much faster at processing prompts, and it's a thinking model. So you see the behavior here is almost like it's having a conversation with itself, figuring out what you want it to do, and then it goes and does the thing. So the thinking models are supposed to improve the quality of the prompts, the quality of the response, and they can troubleshoot more. And I've actually seen this happen really, really well. When there are errors, I've seen it try 2 or 3 attempts and then get the right response. And again, because you're running locally, you're not really that worried about running into API limits or using up credits. It's a really great way of, I think using this and just learning a little bit more about how models actually work behind the scenes. So here you can see these are the arguments it loaded. These are this is the response that it got back. And you can see I have 3 definitions, which is correct. I've obviously know my own Tableau instance very well. So I have 3 definitions, and you can pass additional arguments, and you can see the thinking model is actually quite, let's say, instructive. It's going ahead and finding new things that it wants to do. And so listen, this is not perfect, but I think this is very good. Given that it's running locally on your machine, you're not paying anything to anyone, and your data isn't going off your machine to Claude or ChatGPT. And as a consultant, I think this is super important. I've honestly been a little bit surprised that this hasn't come up. I think it's maybe something that people are doing quietly, and so maybe doesn't have as much sort of traction as ChatGPT and Claude. But I think it's a great way of working, and you can play with the MCP knowing that you're not putting your company's data at risk. Okay. What I'd be really keen to know is if you try this, I'd love to see what successes you have. I've got so many sort of small ideas about using this capability. For example, hey, can we get this to work with things like table extensions? Can we get this to work inside of Tableau Prep? Maybe do the classic old survey analysis example. Who knows? But the fact that you can do this locally, I think opens up options. And this is the kind of thing where this is what it's like today. And of course, not everyone changes a laptop every year. I get that. But in 3 years' time, it's quite reasonable you'll have a new laptop with enough RAM and much improved local models to be able to really get some of the best experience, very similar to what we get today, but in 3 years' time, running locally on your machine. So I think it's worth starting to pay attention. This stuff can be really powerful for analytics teams and how they start to think about tooling in the way they do their work, and not just using these chatbots as like a way of, doing sort of like what I would say one-off showcase projects. This is actually something practical. You can deploy it, you can run it, you can work with IT to figure it out. And if it works, you might even say, well, let's productionize this properly. Let's go get Ollama, let's set up a server internally and start allowing our users to be able to query the server themselves. Okay, that's pretty much it in the video. I just wanted to show you, here's how it works, here's how it can work. I'd be really curious to see, hey, what models are you trying? Would you like to see another demo, another tutorial on Tableau MCP? Have you got any questions that you'd love to have me answer on this topic? I have a lot of, in my head, profound thoughts about the way MCPs can work. I'm not going to cover them in this video. We've already been going for 20 minutes. But I will follow up at some point before the end of the year with how I think this technology, as it develops, will become pivotal, because in many ways it opens up a whole world of opportunities, not just for people who use Tableau, but actually fundamentally other applications to better integrate with Tableau. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.